I remember when my first child was born in 1983, the end of 1983. Excuse me. It came right after the first funeral I actually ever went to. It was a relative, a grandmother. And it was just a few weeks before the birth of my son. And it was, I remember, one of those Edgar Allan Poe days. It was a wintry, hail, snowy, sleety day, very cold, winds blowing. And it was the first time I actually saw an open grave. And the body was put into it. It was had a very deep impact on me. And then, just a little while later, literally a month later, my child was born. And I had this thought that the door opens up between two realities twice. Once upon birth, where a new soul enters into a body, and out of a womb comes a new child. Miraculous. Who knows? How can we even understand or fathom that? And then at the end of life, when another door opens up and welcomes back the body of a life that was here for whatever amount of years that person spent in this world. And it dawned upon me that we know very little about what's on the other side of the door. The door where life begins, that opens up and a new life enters, and the door where life ends, and that life moves on to another dimension. But today, basic physics tells us that nothing disappears. All matter turns into energy, and energy can be converted back into matter. So, just like when you burn a piece of wood in a fire, the wood may no longer be there, but the energy that it generates is there. And even when the fire burns out, somewhere it remains in the stratospheres, in the cosmos. And when you think of it that way, and you get yourself out of the narrow box, you come to realize a very important realization. As someone who's been called upon to console and comfort many people, and always very difficult when you have to deal with someone who's going through a loss, a death. And until my father passed away 15 years ago, then first-hand experience, it changes everything, to be honest. So people would always ask me, and still ask me, where does a soul go to after we die? Where's the soul of my father, of my mother, of my relative, sometimes, unfortunately, tragically, of a child, of others? Where does it go to, if anywhere? Are they at peace? One of the big questions people ask. And I was always at loss of words, not knowing really what to say. What do you say? That I really know where it goes? No, I couldn't answer that question. But then something struck me, an epiphany, and I realized something that always bothered me about the question. The question itself is based on a premise, and that premise is, we are where it's at, we're like the center of the universe, we're where it's at, and we're wondering, where does the soul go to? Maybe that axiom, maybe that assumption is wrong. How do we know where we are, where it's at? We only know where we are right now, but we don't know necessarily all of reality. And I began to respond with a somewhat of a almost ridiculous analogy, an imaginary conversation, a dialogue between a refrigerator and electricity. So the refrigerator asks the electricity, where do you go to when they pull the plug? The electricity responds incredulously, what kind of chutzpah, what nerve do you have to ask me such a question? You're a little box. They just invented you 100 or 200 years ago. They figured out how to generate me electricity, get me confined in this box that you are, and you refrigerate food. And now you think you're the center of existence. You ask me where I go? I've been here long before you were ever invented or created. I go back to my natural place, which is beyond time and space that you'll ever know. All you know is your box. So I go back to the place where those confines don't limit me. Now, could the refrigerator understand that? Most likely not. And then anyone who I've ever said this to, believer or not, said, of course, makes total sense. If that's the case with electricity and the refrigerator or any appliance, then how much more so with the mysteries of life and death, soul and body? So the body is a box, yes, And while we're alive, we experience life in many different ways: biological life, emotional life, intellectual life, transcendent life, whatever, however one defines life. And then at some point, the plug is pulled. The electricity, however you define a soul, is no longer attached to the body. So the body can be completely intact, the refrigerator can be intact, but there's no juice. There's no electricity. Therefore, it's not functioning as a refrigerator. And to ask the question, where do you go? We can ask the question, but the answer is obvious. You are in a very small little space, and you barely know about that space. How much do we know about life? With all the magic and all the advancements and breakthroughs and breathtaking breakthroughs of medicine, we still know so little, even about the body, about the brain. A brain the size of, a little more than this, larger than the size of my palm. What do we know about the brain? We know much, but there's so much more to know. So this little frame of a body, 5 or 6 feet tall, 100 or 200 pounds, we won't go higher than that, and still remains in many ways a mystery. That's in the box, let alone what's outside of it. So really, death, with all its tragedy and all its pain and loss, is really an opportunity to wake us up to a higher reality, to realize that electricity, soulfulness, spirituality, life, is much deeper than just life within the body. So really, even saying the idea is there life after death, is there life before birth? If a soul of the electricity indeed is always there, it's just a question of whether we experiencing that life. Makes total sense that the electricity goes on even after the box is no longer there, or deteriorates, or erodes, or is not functioning, meaning the refrigerator or any other appliance. So really what we should really say, it's life after life, or stages in the life journey of a soul. And we know one part, the part that we're aware of in the period of time and the space that we occupy during our lifetimes. Whenever we become aware of that, until the moment we're no longer aware. And yet there is something far greater that preceded us and will continue. That's not to minimize our lives. On the contrary, it means your specific life is a connection and as a part of a long journey. It makes life far more meaningful, actually, far richer, because it didn't begin with you, it doesn't end with you. It means it's a journey. And therefore there's the concept of reincarnation, the idea of a soul returning. It's the simple logic of a soul continuing its journey. And I go back to electricity. Electricity does not disappear just because the appliance isn't functioning or because we're not aware of it. How many thousands of years did electricity exist and we didn't even know it existed until we discovered it? And how many other forces are out in nature that we have not yet discovered? So all this is really meant to tell us about the majestic and awesome journey that life is, that is far beyond the scope of our narrow box of time and space, and that we can connect with it. That's the most powerful point. We can connect with it even here when we lose that arrogance and we gain that humility of recognizing that it's a piece of a bigger whole. Then you connect to that whole. It's like someone reading a chapter in a book, and that's it. They finish the chapter and they think that's the beginning and end of the story. But it's not. The narrative is here before that chapter, and there's chapters that will follow. Recognizing that makes this chapter so much richer, so much more profound, so much more complex, because it's a chapter in a long story, which is also a perspective on looking at life in general. That things that happen to us in life can overwhelm us, can depress us, can really challenge us, even, and sometimes serious trauma. No one denies that. However, if you think of it as part of a longer story, it doesn't take away necessarily from the immediate pain, but at least gives it some context, some perspective. Kierkegaard said, we can only understand our lives backwards, but we have to live our lives frontwards. When you look back in retrospect, you start seeing the pieces coming together. Going forward, we don't always see those pieces, but we can if we step back and don't worship the here and now. Don't worship instant gratification. As much as it's tempting, it traps you into your little box, and that's what you see. So when someone asks you, what does the horizon look like? If you're standing in your little box, there's going to be one answer, a very small answer. If someone opens themselves and goes up 10 feet on a mountain, that's a different answer. And if you go to the top of the mountain, it's a third answer. And they're all correct depending what perspective you're looking at. The one standing on the ground is correct when he says he doesn't see much from that perspective. He just has to add those words, from my perspective. However, if you broaden your horizons and you allow your imagination and you're allowed to dream and you're allowed to aspire and you read and you think and you imagine, what happens? Horizons are broadened. So essentially when we begin to study about the soul and we begin to relate to it, we realize that yes, it comes from a far vaster perspective and panorama than we can ever imagine. But by allowing that perspective in of the fuller narrative, your chapter, your specific chapter and verse becomes richer because you see it not just as a piece, not just as the immediate piece it is, but part of that bigger picture. I always think of the analogy of a guy riding on a boat down a river, the river of time. Even though, frankly, time is not a river, it's not linear, time is more cyclical and even a spiral. Time is energy, and it returns to the axis. But nevertheless, it is a journey. So think of it as a circular, a spiral type of river. But it is and you're riding down this river of time. And obviously what you see and experience empirically with your sight, sound, taste, touch, and smell and other tools and instruments, you see the banks of the river, you see the happenings, the events, the creature, whatever is happening around you. And as good as your eyesight may be, you see far, you can see a little further, you see back, but there's a limit how much you're going to see. Now you know, yesterday you were on the river a little earlier, you saw things that you didn't see today. And tomorrow, as you travel further, you're going to see more things. Is there a way to see the whole picture? Well, you could imagine it, but there's a way. Imagine now a bird that's flying, a bird's eye view, sees the entire picture, sees the entire river, sees the bank yesterday and before yesterday and so on, and sees where it's headed. Now to take the next step of the analogy. This little bird flies and lands on your shoulder, right there on the boat. So now what do you have? You have your perspective as you're in the boat, but now you have the bird speaking to you, whispering to you about the broader perspective. The bird is the soul. The body is the person on the boat. Bodies, like any physical entity, can only experience time and space as it knows it. That's its ability. And that's what it's supposed to be focusing on, the here and the now. A little sense, a little context, a little perspective, because you can see a little wider, broader, but not the full bird's eye view. The bird, the soul, has the capacity to see a bigger picture. So if something happens in your life, whether it's a joyous event or it's a sad event, the body will tell you right now, be happy. Right now, be sad. The bird, the soul, will tell you, yes, you're entitled to be sad or happy, but remember there's a bigger picture. The story is not over. The chapter is not over. The boat is continuing to ride. And time and space, therefore, even though we're limited there, but you're not only a box, you're not only a refrigerator, you're also the forces beneath the surface. And when you connect to that and you live a soulful life, in other words, not living a life distracted or seduced by the here and now, but by a bigger picture. What are the long-term results of my behavior, of my actions? By a certain value system and standards. You are connecting yourself to the bird, to the soul, which gives you the bigger picture, which in turn informs your smaller picture. So it's not denying the smaller picture. It's not denying the box or the refrigerator. It's informing it that there's a lot more going on. This is why we're told, there's a verse, a beautiful verse, a very sad but beautiful verse in Ecclesiastes, in Kabbalah. King Solomon says, "V'hachai yitna libay," that the living shall take to heart. That when there's a death, a passing, the living shall take to heart. What are they taking to heart? It's an opportunity when you suddenly see the crack open up, the door open up, and the mystery of the beginning and end. It's not just an opportunity, it's a responsibility to take to heart. Don't be arrogant in your moment. Be humble. Recognize there's a bigger picture. Accountability, sensitivity, seeing that there's more than meets the eye. And that indeed the soul does continue on. It's painful because we cannot connect on our terms, but the soul does continue on and its journey. And when you do something soulful, especially in the name, and honoring the departed soul, you're actually creating a channel between body and soul. Your life, as you live according to and in spirit of the legacy and the values that the person, your loved one, has passed, what you're doing is you're continuing to channel the soulful energy into the boxes of this material world. And that's where the real power lies, the potency. Not just that we connect on a spiritual level, that even this material world, with all its limitations and all the confines and parameters of time and space, can actually be elevated to a more soulful and spiritual place. It's like teaching the refrigerator about electricity, and the refrigerator listens and says, interesting, there's more to reality than I would know. And not just listens, but lives a life accordingly. That's when you know your life is taking on a deeper shape and form. When you're not a victim of circumstances, where you're not just defined by the here and now, where time and space don't control you. Yes, we live under the guidelines and the rules of time and space, but they don't control you because you can do things that are timeless and spaceless, which means you can do something that has eternal impact. Not temporary, not impermanent, something that has permanent impact. In a kind word you say, in a good deed, in a good thought. These things generate energy, and that energy can last forever. There are people who, even when they were alive, people couldn't wait for them to leave this world because they were tyrants, they were cruel, they were hurtful. There are people who are not here for thousands of years on this earth, and we remember them with love. So there's a statement that says, the wicked, even in their lives, they're called dead. And the righteous, even in their deaths, they're called alive. Why? Because living is not just biological living, it's not just breathing, it's not just a heart beating. It's the effect you have on people's lives. And yes, there are people that lived 4,000 years ago, Abraham and Sarah. And we talk about them as they're here today, because we talk about their kindness, and their generosity, and the families they built, and the legacy they left us. And then there are people that are right now existing, and yes, they're here, and they may be powerful and influential, but will that last? Will anyone remember them 3,000 years? Will anyone remember them a day after? Will anyone want to remember them? So life is a lot more than just what immediate impact you're having. Obviously, everybody occupies time and space. You're sitting in your chair. But that's just for the now. Will you be remembered in that way? Will you live on? Will people look at you as a role model, an example of what it means to be truly alive? And in that sense, that's what we learn from death. We learn the idea of appreciating that which is greater than what we can fathom and perceive with our own limited tools. So yes, on one hand we grieve and we mourn, and we should, because it is the loss of a loved one, but the story doesn't end there. That soul continues its journey. We may not feel it, but when we concentrate and we focus and we align ourselves to soulful lives, you connect in a certain way. And that soul connects with you. Sometimes you can sense it, sometimes you can't. But the point is the eternity of the values, the eternity of the message, the eternity of the life continues to live on. And it's very powerful to say that you come from a line of people that go back thousands of years in an unbroken chain, committed and dedicated to generosity, to virtue, to goodness, to spreading light, to helping others, not just themselves. That's powerful. And I'm proud to be one of those people, because I can talk about Abraham and Sarah, our ancestors, and their children, and their children's children in an unbroken chain. Are we all perfect? Obviously not. We all make our mistakes, but still, a midget standing on the shoulder of giants can see farther than the giant can. So that's a great gift. And all of us can access these type of eternal connections, eternal values. The key is not to get trapped, not to get seduced, not to be held hostage by the confines of your refrigerator, but to allow yourself to recognize there's more to life than the here and now and the box of time and space as we know it. And when we do that, we become far, far greater people. A mortal human being can become immortal. A finite creature can become infinite, because we're touching it and we channel it through our lives. But it's all about us and how we do things. I want to take this opportunity, since we're about to enter Rosh Hashanah, the New Year, the Hebrew New Year, to wish everybody a very blessed year, a sweet year, a healthy year. Coming from a pandemic, which is still with us, we should only become stronger and recognize that challenges are here to make us bigger and greater people. and look at the bigger picture, not just the moment, but the moment should also be pleasant and beautiful. Very blessed year. Because of the holidays, this live program on Sundays will be pushed off until the holidays are over. You'll hear more information. We'll post it all. But it's been an honor, as always, to speak with you. Let us all connect on a soulful level which does transcend time and space. Please share your thoughts, feedback, comments, share with others, pay it forward. Let's all create a ripple effect of a spiritual immortality that infuses this mortal world with eternity itself. Heaven and earth kissing, embracing, and becoming fused as one. Thank you again. Simon Jacobson here. Meaningful Life. Go to meaningfullife.com for more information, more programs, our full schedule of events. Everyone be blessed. Again, a very blessed year to you all.